was a huge game changer early on in our parenting, my husband and I, because we had these girls that would feed on each other and freak each other out at night. When Charlotte Mason inspired us to be like, well, that's your problem. You're the one who chose to think that. You don't have to think that. That changed everything because it forced them to take responsibility for their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And now they try to force me to do that, which is super annoying. But anyway. Welcome to Scholé Sisters, where we are cultivating the maximum number of thinking moms we can. This is the podcast for classical homeschooling mamas who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. Scholé Sisters discusses topics that matter to those of us who believe that educating ourselves through reading widely, thinking deeply, and applying faithfully equips us for the task of educating our children. I am your host, Brandy Venzel. To get my free, almost weekly, mostly Charlotte Mason newsletter, go to afterthoughtsblog.net/subscribe and sign up. My co-hosts today are Mystie Winkler and Abby Wall. Mystie is a homeschooling mom of 5, including 2 graduates. She writes and podcasts at simplyconvivial.com and is the author of The Convivial Homeschool. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Have you heard about our ongoing Sophie Mentorship? It started on October 23rd, and it's not too late to join us. The mentorship is called Grow Up, Courage to be the Adult in the Room. We're reading from 4 different books and having various types of rich discussions as we flesh out how to grow up so that we can better mother our children. There is a 3-week break over Christmas to give time to catch up if you want to jump in now. Just go to scholésisters.com/sistership and join as a Sophie to be a part of this fabulous 4-month study. That's scholésisters.com/sistership. Today's episode is the second in our 4-part series on habits and training. Last time we talked about physical training. Today, we're discussing intellectual training, including that most controversial assertion of Charlotte Mason that attention can be trained. You're going to love this conversation, and so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scholé Everyday. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
So I am about halfway through The Christian Family by Herman Bavinck. And I think, Brandy, you've read this one?
I think so.
Before?
It's so funny because at first I was like, is it good? And then I'm like, hold on, it is good. I know this.
It's super good. The translation is super readable and it's so interesting. So he's writing right about the turn of the century into the 20th century. So it's like before World War I.
Yeah.
So in a lot of places, he is responding to, basically first wave feminism and the suffrage type arguments. Although I'm not sure if he takes on that issue particularly, but he's really trying to, it's more than make definitions. He's really trying to cast the vision as well for why these distinctions between male and female, particularly within marriage, matter and their significance, while still not going too far on the opposite extreme of like saying, there's super different.
Right.
Or like he maintains the ways in which men and women are equally persons, equally. And he also contrasts like the difference between a wife and a single woman. There's gender difference, but then there's also, it's really a vocational difference and the meaning and the reasoning behind that. It's not a long book, but it's very solid and it's very, I wouldn't say dense because I think of dense as also being hard to read. And it really is not hard to just keep turning the pages, but every paragraph is saying something significant. So it's just
It does feel very dense, even though it's a little book.
Yeah. Yeah. He says a lot. He just goes from one like super important thing to another. Let me see. I have a couple pages marked. Okay. So this quote I thought was basically the apply faithfully
Oh, okay.
quote. So he says, for this reason, it's not enough to know and confess good principles. They must be developed and applied continuously, day after day, moment by moment. As soon as a slackening occurs in application, the enemy exalts himself and once again assumes mastery over lost territory. The history of the family within Christianity is therefore a story not only of the incalculably rich blessing deriving from the Christian confession for family life, but also of various aberrations and evils that have appeared repeatedly in this area and that serve to undermine and destroy marital life. And he goes, it's like a historical overview of both times in history where the family, particularly marriage, was encouraged and strengthened by the cultural applications and assumptions, and then weakened and disparaged. And it's a pretty even-handed telling of the history, I think.
I need to read it again. I feel like there was so much in it that I could read it again to great benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a book you could reread.
I don't have that one, so I might have to make this a real episode.
Yay! Well, you already did.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Now there's two options.
My children interrupt, or someone buys a book. Could be just a bonus.
And if both happen, it's like a super episode.
Yeah, there we go. The book that Abby says she's going to talk about is one I have considered buying.
Okay.
So I'm excited.
So it goes well with what you were just saying about these different times when culture was strengthened and when it slacked and different things like that. So I read The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe years ago, probably like 10 or 12 years ago.
Oh.
And it was really good. It has some people think that they kind of cherry pick through history, but I actually think they do a great job of, filling out their thesis, which is there are seasons and there are these different turnings, and they're called the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis. And
this is in history, right?
In history.
Seasons of history.
Yeah, seasons of history. They also talk about like archetypes, and he has like biblical characters. Like they do a lot to kind of draw these different illustrations of these types of eras. So it's really interesting. Like I actually really did enjoy the first book quite a bit. And I mean, it had some critiques on it, like, oh, they're just really cherry picking. But I think for the most part, it seems pretty feasible and understandable and those kinds of things. And this one is Neil Howe is just writing it now because William Strauss actually passed away a few years ago. So his co-author and his good friend. But these are really smart guys. Well-researched, good writing. And so a lot of it, this first one, it sounds a little doom and gloom in the beginning because it's just talking about that we are actually on this, it's called the millennial crisis. And we are currently in a turning that's going to last a little bit longer because they last for about 80 to 100 years.
Oh, is that all?
It just goes through this idea. And it really started right around 2008 because that's the big financial crash. This millennial crisis turning and things like that.
The season lasts for 100 years?
Well, it's these different generations. So like right now, they actually have a PDF to go with it because I did get it on Audible because I was like, I just don't know if I have enough time to. It's a big book, like a couple hundred pages, maybe 400 pages. It's like 12 hours or something. I don't know. But like right now, I just had it. There's a thing. Okay. So right now, the American high in the millennial kind of crisis or whatever, like it's from 1946 to 1964 was kind of the American high. Then there was the consciousness revolution from 64 to 84, and then the culture wars from 84 to 2008. And then we're now in the millennial crisis, which is 2008 to 2033. Maybe it's got a question mark against there. So it just kind of goes through and it gives different things, like it has late medieval, Tudor, Revolutionary, Civil War, it just goes through these different ideas of like when it happened and what kinds of things happened. And like in the generations before us, so like the Reconstruction and the Gilded Age, 1865 to 1886. And then the second turning, that awakening was the Third Great Awakening, 1886 to 1908. And then you have the unraveling, the third turning, which is World War I and Prohibition, 1908 to 1929. And then you have the fourth turning, which is the crisis, which is the Great Depression and World War II. So it kind of goes in these different cycles throughout history, and it goes back for a ways. It's going to be interesting because, what's happening in our world right now and how much longer is this going to last? And
sounds like my whole life.
Yeah.
Gosh, Abby, I don't want to read this book anymore.
No. But it is good because, there is nothing new under the sun. And he even has a chapter called like, There's Nothing New. He is not a Christian as far as I know. I think he's just an academic, but it doesn't seem to be overly concerned with political correctness or just, a lot of like, there's not a lot of that because it is looking through a historical lens. And then this idea that things are repeating. And then this is kind of what maybe we can look to see with what might happen. So I don't know. I've always found it interesting. I'm only a couple chapters in. So it's like I said, it's been a while since I read the last one, but it is pretty neat. And they call this turnings, the saculum is one of the words that he has kind of used in the past. So it's great because they talk about, the political, the economical, or the economic, the social, and oftentimes the religious, and then the different trigger events that have happened. And it just kind of gives an idea of where we might be heading. The first little bit is about kind of the American malaise towards, the government can no longer carry out even the most basic tasks, right?
True.
There's no trust among the American people and to institutions, more broadly, right? There's
also true.
some big economic inequality, declining public health, moral and legal chaos are some of the things that he talks about, strife between the sexes, collapse of family formation and birth rates. So he says these are all predictable because this is almost always how it happens. So winter is here, but spring is coming is his thing. So it's hopefully going to get a little more hopeful, but he's really setting the stage for, the next 10 years that are going to be, hang on to your hats, cowboys. So,
well, that's encouraging.
Yeah. And I don't usually like these things, but since I read the first one, I was like, oh, I didn't realize they had a new one come out. And so anyway, Mystie, are you still considering reading it?
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's 20 hours.
Yeah, that's what it is. It was not 12. It was 20. It was a big book. Yep.
Well, I think Brett, our guest that confronted you on politics, would be so proud of you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm still interested in these things.
I know. I'm just teasing.
I just don't want to. I just want to be in politics because they're real icky, and I have a lot of basically no trust in those kinds of institutions.
Yeah.
Pretty much the exact what Neil Howe says here.
That's probably why you like it. It's so confirming.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. See, I knew I didn't want to be a part of that nonsense. Anyway.
Well, my book is so niche. I guess that's how you say it. I think we had struggled with saying that word in the very first season. And here we are 22 seasons later, still can't decide how to say this word.
Well, we also haven't decided Augustine or Augustine. So, I feel like we can say it both ways.
I feel like I have settled on Augustine personally.
Oh, okay.
Because Pam said, because Augustine is a saint and Augustine is a city in Florida. And I was like, good point. So anyway, so my book is so niche that I almost didn't share it, but then it's like, this is what I've been reading over the last week and I couldn't think of anything else. So I'm sharing it, but I'll share it with a caveat, which is this really is for well, it's called Healing Complex Children with Homeopathy. It really is for more advanced students. So I'm saying this knowing that the vast majority of the audience is like not ready for a book like this, because I do think that you have to have all the beginner stuff under your belt to really benefit from a book like this. But the subtitle is ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, PANDAS, PANS, Lyme, ADHD, and more. I feel like I've been looking for a very long time for a book that would function sort of like a handbook on trying to deal with some of these things at home, only because there aren't a lot of practitioners of any type that actually make a lot of progress with kids like this. So then it gets very expensive, and yet you have nothing to show for it. I'm not against spending money on things like this, but I need to see evidence that that's a worthwhile thing to do. And that's what I often don't see. I see people throwing good money after bad. It's the whole sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, I've already spent $500 for this practitioner, so I'm going to stay, even though we're not doing anything that is helping. Anyway, I get very cautious about getting involved in that kind of thing, even though like there are days where I'm like, man, we could really use some help around here. So this book has been seriously amazing, mainly because a lot of the homeopathy books out there are really using very old language, and they talk about diseases using words that nobody uses. Not even your family doctor uses it anymore. It was super common language when people were really into homeopathy in the United States, which is to say before the invention of antibiotics. Because basically we had homeopathic hospitals until antibiotics became a thing, and then that kind of supplanted it. I don't even know that that necessarily was a bad thing, but it is what it is. This book is just wonderful because it's using words that we would actually use, and it's using common language. So even though she's a practitioner, she really is writing this knowing that a lot of mothers are going to have to take matters into their own hands. So she's not saying, oh, and for this information, you have to find a practitioner. That's one thing that drives me crazy, is that if people will name remedies and then they'll say, for dosing information, you need a practitioner, but you can't find one lots of times. And so then it's like you have just enough information to be dangerous. But this, she's actually given quite a bit about dosing and potency selection and the whole thing. So it has been wonderful. And so then, without violating my children's privacy very much, I did find a remedy that sounded remarkably accurate and put one of my children on this remedy, and everyone is commenting on the changes. And it's only been 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
I've looked at this remedy before, but because the materia medica I was using antiquated language, it didn't really ring true when I read it. But just because she's just describing, well, I think she's also describing in the age of autism, right? And so she's added some things with her own observations that people were not seeing in 1925 or whatever, because you might go your whole life and never meet an autistic person at that time. Anyway, I think the book has been remarkable. It actually was suggested to me by a friend who also has spent a lot of time going to practitioners that haven't helped very much and also feels like she's making great progress using this book. So one of the main reasons why I decided to go ahead and bring it here is because I know we have listeners that have kids that struggle with these things, and I know they get frustrated. And I think sometimes it really does pay to just keep educating ourselves until we find something that works. I'm not even saying this book would help everybody, because I don't know that that's true. But I don't know. I just feel like every time I feel like I'm up against a wall, I pray and the Lord shows me like the next step. And usually it's in a book that is just there because I'm just always reading the next thing, trying to help my children. So highly recommend it for people who are ready for a more advanced training manual from homeopathy. There you go.
Hi, Abby here to tell you about Sistership. Sistership is the place for homeschooling moms to ask questions and share tried and true principles from years of experience. We have thoughtful, intelligent, thinking moms that read widely, think deeply, and faithfully apply what they learn. We tackle serious topics, but don't take ourselves too seriously. We value educational principles over products, and we'll always be ad-free and drama-free because we refuse to take offense at differing opinions. We seek truth, goodness, and beauty, and would love for you to join us in Sistership. It's free. Come for the encouragement and stay for the fun.
Today, this is our second in our 4-part series on Charlotte Mason's chapters from school education that cover the training of physical, intellectual, moral, and religious habits. So we already did physical. The other 2 we're not doing till next season. So enjoy this one because this is all you're getting. Subscribe if you want more. How about that?
There we go.
Little tiny bit of marketing. It's about all I'm capable of. So today we're discussing the training of intellectual habits. First, before we talk about and name the actual habits, we're going to go through Charlotte Mason's paradigm for thinking about these things. And so this whole conversation is based on school education, chapter 11. And I love the way it ties into the previous chapter because she starts us off with something that we really talked about a lot in the last one, which is this idea of ye are not your own. You're not your own master. You were born to be under authority. And she makes a very interesting point when she starts out because she says, we are very willing to say, oh yeah, my moral life should be under authority. My religious life should be under authority, even physical life, because we'll talk about things like your body's the temple or something like that. But she says, when it comes to intellectual matters, she says, we're disposed to stand upon our rights. Here we recognize no authority, abide by no law. Every man is free to his own opinion, however casually formed. And it's remarkable to me that she said that so long ago because it feels even probably more true than it was then, because not only does someone have a right to their opinion, you're supposed to respect it, no matter how casually formed.
Yeah.
Even if all they did was read the headline and not even the article.
Well, and now even your opinion that you have a right to, you might just call your truth. And no one's allowed to question you.
Yes. Good point. She doesn't talk a ton about opinion formation. In the sense of like how you would form a good opinion. But I feel like that little statement, however casually formed, really packs a little punch because for Charlotte Mason, if you read some of her other stuff, if you are just parroting something that you heard somewhere else, she has so little respect for that she says it's not really an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
To her, an opinion, whether she agrees with you or not, you have to be standing on some sort of foundation, meaning that you read, you spent time thinking, you research, like you put work into it. If you didn't put work into it, it's a reflex. It's not an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically all TikTok videos, right? You just parrot the words that are coming out of other people's mouths in your own little video. I don't know.
Right. No, it's so many things though, right? I mean, I think we aren't even taught to recognize that something is an opinion sometimes.
Yeah.
People will state them as fact.
Right. I think all of us just have a tendency to accept the thoughts that happen into our head. However we assess our situation, we just assume it's true.
Right.
And so, we talk about that all the time in Convivial Circle, right? Because it's about your story. What story are you telling yourself? And, I find a lot of women don't even realize that their thoughts about their life or other people are just thoughts that happened into their head. But because they're in their head, they're like, this is what I think. I was like, but you can stop and assess and say, is it true though? Because sometimes I think things that are not true.
So true.
Yeah. And we all do. And we need to just have that habit, which is why it is an intellectual habit of stopping and saying, wait, but is that true? And, I think it's Martin Lloyd-Jones who would say, you have to preach to yourself, not listen to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You just made a connection for me because people at my church will say that phrase a lot. You have to preach to yourself. And it just dawned on me that there was a stage when a lot of people at church were reading Lloyd-Jones. I bet that's where it came from.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. I kind of missed out on participating in the reading because it was still in my pre-reading stage. But looking back, I'm thinking, oh, they adopted some of his vocabulary. I'm sure that's what happened. That's funny. Well, I appreciated her trying to even bring us back together as humans, where she says, our thinking is not a separate thing from our conduct and our prayers, or even from our bodily well-being. Man is not several entities. He is one spirit with many powers.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me how many things kind of go back to us playing fast and loose with what a man even is.
Yeah.
And again, not realizing we're doing it. I feel like I'm constantly realizing how many casual thoughts I have that are slightly off because I haven't really taken the time to examine them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're close enough to what is right that I'm not alarmed at myself. The way maybe I should be. I don't know. So she talks about the limits of reason, because really she's making an argument for the training of these intellectual habits, and she's building her argument. So her first line of her argument is basically the whole "you are not your own" thing. Like, you're not your own. You don't have the right to just think whatever you want. There's no area of your life in which you get to do what you want with yourself.
Yeah.
So that's like her whole first thing. Well, then she gets into the limitations of reason. Does anyone want to narrate what she's saying here or what she's getting at?
It talks about how we will sometimes go to bed with a difficult question and then, we'll sleep on it, right? That's the thing we'll sleep on. And then we wake up in the morning and behold, the whole question has worked itself out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she goes on to say, and I'll just quote this because I wasn't quite sure on this. We are so accustomed to take wonders as a matter of course, mere everyday events, that it does not occur to us to be surprised. We even say the mind is clearer after sleep, regardless of the fact that we have no labor of thinking at all in the morning. All comes straight itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we come to think of it as most of our decisions arrive in this unlaborious way. That somehow how our decisions come to us in a flash. But anyway, she goes on to say that children should be taught to know that much of our reasoning and so-called thinking is involuntary and a natural function. And it's that very fact points to it as its limitation. The idea is that oftentimes we don't even have the reason. It's intuition. It's just happening.
Yeah.
I don't know. That I was a little, I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah, I think she's saying that, we might take credit for thinking something out when actually we're just following intuition. Like, we didn't spend any time on it. We're just letting our unconscious mind work on it, which it does.
Yeah.
And it's not like that's bad, but we need to be maybe a little bit more precise, which she talks about later, and say, that was not actually thinking it through and coming to a conscious decision. That really was just intuition. And let's just be clear on what we're talking about. And then I think the next section is where she's explaining about what is called the way of reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the term.
The official terminology.
Right.
We're going to give you the CM stamp.
Awesome. I don't want it. I never encountered this idea until I read Charlotte Mason and really struggled to figure out what she was saying. But once I figured it out, I was like, oh, wait, that's so totally true.
I know.
And so it's like, you can use your reason to think something through, but reason isn't a standard. Reason isn't something outside of you that you can grab onto and it gives you truth. Reason is just your ability to think about things, and your ability to think about things is limited and it's biased.
Yeah.
So if you want to come up with reasons for doing something, you can, even if it's a bad idea. And you will think that your reasons are good reasons to do the bad thing, but they aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so, the whole Enlightenment project was a claim that reason is infallible. Like, we can use reason to come to truth, And Charlotte Mason is contradicting those Enlightenment thinkers.
Yeah.
A reason didn't make a good God in the French Revolution.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
We read Tale of Two Cities this summer, and it was a very good reminder of what a terrible goddess reason is. Goodness.
And any of us who've ever had a 12-year-old know that the reasons can be laid out. And it's like, no, actually, that none of your reasons are valid. Like, it doesn't matter.
And they also, at 15, can tell you why your reasons don't matter.
Well, we all have the inner 12-year-old as well as the inner 2-year-old.
Oh, that's true. That is true. I've always appreciated that she says children should be taught this. If they think their reason is important, they do walk around not recognizing that their reason often is just helping them justify whatever they want to be true.
Yes, right.
It's just a way of making their case, often to their mom.
Yes.
One of the things that we started doing, it's a different place where she talks about the way of the reason, but she talked about one thing that you can do with children is discuss the line of reasoning of a character in a book. And so I got to where I tried to look for those opportunities. Like, not every book gives you insight into what a character is thinking. So when it does, is when to capitalize on that. Like, you can't just write a curriculum where you're going to discuss that with every book or something, because, you know, they're not all psychological novels.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, seriously. We had some really, really interesting conversations around that time. In fact, I was thinking after reading this, we need to go back to that, but where we would just be, I think there was one, it was the Prince Jen book. It's like a Chinese fantasy novel. I can't remember the full title of it, but I'm sure you can find it when you're doing the notes, Mystie. It's not The Adventures of Prince Jen, but it's something like that. But there's a place where there's this magic saddle, and there's just all these horrible things that will happen if someone other than the rightful person uses it. There's this moment where one of the attendants is very tempted to use it. And it's totally like the book of Genesis. You know, it's the whole like, oh, sees it looks good for food. And, you know, just that entertaining in the mind. And we had a fabulous conversation afterwards because it was very, very out there in the book about how your reason can deceive you if you're not careful. Before he fell into this, shall we say, sin, which resulted in a curse, really, he had dispensed with authority because he knew the rules. He knew he wasn't supposed to touch that saddle. He knew he wasn't supposed to use that saddle. But it was just like even the garden. He was deceived by his own reason as he's looking at it and starts to covet this thing that he's not supposed to have. Anyway, it was just like a super fascinating little section of a kid's novel that actually gives you insight into something like that. It was perfect for the conversation. Nobody really tells you about this stuff as a child. They don't tell you, you don't have to be a slave to your own thoughts. I'm disturbed that I'm thinking this, Mom. You don't have to think that. Stop thinking that. Like, it's just things that we aren't really, culturally, we don't say.
Right.
You know, we immediately rush in and we're like, oh, I'm so sorry you're thinking that. How scary.
Right. We're told you're supposed to affirm what people think. Whatever you think, just say, oh, tell me more. Or I'd like dwell on it. Let's like really hash this out instead of saying, nope, try again.
Yeah. What was a huge game changer early on in our parenting, my husband and I, because we had these girls that would feed on each other and freak each other out at night. When Charlotte Mason inspired us to be like, well, that's your problem. You're the one who chose to think that. You don't have to think that. That changed everything because it forced them to take responsibility for their thoughts. And now they try to force me to do that, which is super annoying. But anyway. So after the limitations of reason, then she kind of goes into really, it's kind of like where knowledge comes from, which gets into that whole taking credit thing that you mentioned, Mystie. Because she says on page 117, you know, like after man basically woke up and learned something, then he has found it out himself, thought it out for himself, observed, reasoned, collected, labored, gathered his forces all together of his own will and for his own ends and as an independent agent. Now this pride of intellect also comes of the arrogance of man, not only in our age, which I venture to think is the very best age the world has ever seen, but in all time. It is our nature to lift up our heads and say, we are the people. Before us, there were none like unto us, neither shall there be any more after us.
That's great that she just gives a little dig at her own era.
Uh-huh. I was thinking about that though. Don't we encourage that thought in our children though?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're so smart. You figured that out. Look at you figuring that out. Like we never tell them, wow, God's grace to you. God showed that to you. It's just not the way that we talk usually. Or I mean, even when I try to talk that way, it feels kind of fake because I really have not trained myself to think that way. I make intellectual assent to something like this, but it's really hard to break myself of the way the world thinks about this, which is we are the people, we figured this out for ourselves.
Right. It is.
I've called my kids out on this a few times. I have purposely said, no, you do not have driving skills. God loves you and he has protected you. And providentially, that is why you didn't wipe out and all of the cars. It has nothing to do with your skills. So there are times when I have just blatantly said, no, that is all because God loves you at this moment in time and you are protected.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that my driving is evidence that I have a guardian angel assigned specifically to keep people safe around me. So, on 118, I love her end to this idea of where knowledge comes from. She just says, what a revolution we should have in our methods of education if we could once conceive that dry as dust subjects like grammar and arithmetic should come to children living with the life of the Holy Spirit, who we are told shall teach you all things.
Yeah.
Which I have recently, though, heard the argument that no, the Bible says the Holy Spirit will teach you about Christ. The argument is very much limiting the work of the Holy Spirit to only religious things.
Well, that seems like that's downstream from assuming that Christianity stops on Sunday, really. Like it's only a limited thing. Well, actually, the fruit of maybe public school thinking where God's not relevant to knowledge. Anyone without the Holy Spirit can know anything because it is man. I think in a lot of ways, we don't see how the Enlightenment has worked its way just into our assumptions. I'm reading Calvin's Institutes right now for the third time. And book one, it's just so book one is my favorite out of the whole thing. Calvin talks about how knowing God is the life of happiness. And you know God better through all the ways that God reveals himself. And the Holy Spirit makes God evident through all the ways that God has revealed himself. And he even calls out the liberal arts as one way that you know God better. And the natural world and the works of God include nature, all the things that God made. But also, he has a whole chapter on how part of the works of God are seen in providence and history, and how things play out is God at work. And so unless we're paying attention to that, we're limited in how we know God and see God.
Well, and Acts tells us we live and move and have our being in Christ, right? Like it is all encompassing. Mystie, you read the book about the Trinity and limiting the Holy Spirit to, I don't know. I think that might be one of those misunderstandings about the Trinity too, right? That somehow it's only spiritual things, but we are not separate, spirit and body. It's one. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, shall we talk about the actual training and what to train?
Let's go for it.
All right. So I guess we should start with her warning. On 119, she gives us a warning and she says, we shouldn't trust blindly to disciplinary subjects. And she gives the example of basically like you could take a mathematician who's super disciplined in this one area and you take him out of his own field and you put him in, to the rest of the world. And he's really not more, he's not more exact or more on the spot than other men. Indeed, he is rather given to make a big hole for the cat and a little hole for the kitten. And then she goes on, the humanities do not always make a man humane. And so she was saying that we trust in disciplinary subjects, basically like as a substitute for real mothering and real fathering. she ends with, there is no reprieve for parents.
Yep.
It rests with them even more than the schoolmaster and his curriculum to form those mental habits which shall give intellectual distinction to their children throughout their lives.
That one belongs in the commonplace.
It really does.
That's the one I highlighted for this. So I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to otherwise.
Oh, good. Well, definitely, I guess even before that, where she's talking about this idea of genius, it just kind of reminded me of how we will often pass. Which book is it actually? Is it the Grit book where she talks about how we will pass over people's effort and ascribe to them, oh, this is talent, or this is giftedness, or like we'll look at a great basketball player. And it is true. There are some things that are a gift. Like no matter how much I practice basketball, will never be tall enough to be competitive at basketball. So there is something about myself I cannot change. But there's plenty of tall people who don't play pro ball. And the difference, lots of times, is not just talent. I mean, there might be some base of talent they're building on, but nobody looks at the hours and hours of hard work and fine tuning that they put into it. They just see this end product and say, oh, how talented they are.
Yeah, there would be personal application to Sting if we noted, well, it's because they work really hard.
Right. And so this is what she's saying about parents, right? We work hard and we give our children intellectual distinction. It's not their talents. It's our hard work in habit training them. So with that said, she starts with attention, which she calls the power of turning the whole force of the mind upon the subject brought before it. I think it's controversial in our day to say attention can be trained. I feel like I got in trouble for saying that on Instagram recently, but I might.
Well, that's because you made me the.
Oh, that's right. I did get in trouble for that.
Yes.
I got in trouble.
Because we were having a private conversation and then Brandy turned it into a quote, a commonplace quote.
That's right.
Yes. Which she did to make controversial, and she did try and do some caveats, but man, people got offended by it. So, yes.
Which what they didn't know was that actually I found it very satisfying because it proved that they had been made to think about it differently. Because it is true that when we're made to think differently about things, lots of times the response is defensiveness or anger or whatever. And so I really didn't care that they unfollowed me because they still were going to think about it afterwards. The idea will follow them. So is this, Abby, since you were the one, so what was your comment? I'm trying to remember how it went.
I think it was, not every adult has adult ADHD. Sometimes we're just addicted to our phones. I've just noticed a lot of people self-diagnosing with adult ADHD. It's not that I don't believe that ADHD exists. Here's my caveat. Or that it's a real thing. I do. But it just seems to me that there has been a massive trend lately. It's like this thing where everyone is now, all of them have adult ADHD. Right? And it's very possible that these kids, or they did even in childhood, have some of this stuff. But I'm talking about your people who are using it as an excuse. Like, I can't even concentrate anymore. I know that when I spend too much time on my phone or on screens, I have a harder time picking up a book and concentrating. Yeah. This is from my own personal experience. I am not going to self-diagnose myself. I'm not going to diagnose myself with ADHD just because I have gotten into some bad intellectual habits, right? I actually have to practice reading and make an effort and take time and bring my attention on a subject fully, put my phone in another room, right? There are things that you can do to help that. I think Digital Minimalism is a great book to encourage you and inspire you, which I probably need to reread, so as my screen time weekly update sends me, you've been on the screens way too much this week, Abby, for shame. So,
well, I really do think also that this kind of a thing is kind of like what I said about narration, I think a couple of episodes ago, but where I talked about how narration training does the largest favor to the child that has trouble speaking.
Yeah.
The one that maybe even has some sort of neurological problem where the forming of words and thoughts out loud is difficult. That is the child who gets the greatest blessing from narration training. And I think the same is true with attention training. I had a couple kids that were pretty much born with a long attention span. The idea of training their attention wasn't hard to do. And it wasn't a great benefit in their life, I don't think, because they pretty much would have been that way no matter what. But the one that really struggled, the one that I had to do reading lessons with a closed door in a sort of dark room with the curtains drawn so that she couldn't see outside, that child's ability to attend now as a much older child, I think is directly tied to all that training that we did when she was little. But like, it was super intense. She's the one that needed it, so it had to be super intense. Now there's just this excusing, well, they have ADHD, so whatever.
Right. Because that's a huge part of it is when you say that, what's the implication?
Right.
And the implication is, it's, something that requires accommodation, or I can't expect that much of myself or my kids, instead of saying, okay, we've got to find some ways to really put some work here because this is the weakness.
Right. Yeah. See, for me, that kind of a label is like, now it's time to go to war. Like, this is the thing we're going to try to beat as best as we can. And I don't necessarily think this means that I can make the blind see or the lame walk. Like, that's the work of the Father. But I do believe that the weak can be made stronger, for sure. And so if a diagnosis explains things away, I think that's a dangerous thing, because that's when we stop looking for help.
Yeah.
Or even trying to help, just on our own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we give ourselves an easy out.
Yeah.
Right? And we are a society that is obsessed with comfort and ease. Well, we were reading today Fallacy Detective. So we're working through AO year 7, some of the books there, because we're on an online discussion group. And the first example has nothing to do with fallacies. It's whether you are a person with a curious mind that's willing to do the work, or you are someone with a mind who doesn't care about such things. Or it could be neither, right? Yeah. Sometimes there's just laziness as well. But this idea that we do have a choice if we are going to have an active mind that's curious about things, or if we're just going to not. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next one is concentration. And I thought her differentiation between attention and concentration was very interesting, because I think I usually group them together.
Mm-hmm.
But she says, attention is being passively receptive, while concentration is the mind actively engaged on some given problem. That's coming into things like math, logic, Latin,
grammar.
Right. Or where they're really trying hard on their written narration, like they're really trying to sort out someone's arguments. They're really trying hard to write a paper. I don't know. There's like there's different level of effort that's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Things like dictation and spelling for my kids require a lot of concentration.
Concentration, she does talk in other places about things being muscular. Concentration, it wears you out faster than attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could pay attention to a whole movie that's 2+ hours long, but how long can I really concentrate?
Yeah.
Before I need to get up and walk around or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, my kids can listen to me read aloud to them, which is how we did so much of our school in the younger years when they really, really struggled with reading. And it required so much more effort for them and the concentration to actually practice reading aloud to me. And still like continues to in certain parts. Like they can listen and pay attention and give me great narrations for a lot longer than what they can actually physically, read. They have to stop, more often, and it takes a lot more effort. So yeah, I think that's true.
Okay, thoroughness is the habit of dissatisfaction with a slipshod, imperfect grasp of a subject, and of mental uneasiness until a satisfying measure of knowledge is obtained. And my question is, how do you train something like that?
Well, today, Mystie would have been so proud. We were on this online discussion, and they were asked a question, and we were on mute. And so we were having our own little side discussion because there was a couple of us. And one of my boys goes, I just really wish we would have brought the dictionary up here. I really could use a definition on this. I think this would really help. And I said, I have a phone. Let me look this up for you. And then he read the definition, and it really helped us in the discussion. So, I mean, that's a point of thoroughness, right?
Good point.
That happens. So, I mean, my mother-in-law, she always brings the dictionary, like always looking up things. So I think that there is a habit and a way of modeling that can help.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And I find looking at the dictionary to be a way to be sure you're thinking about a thing properly. And it's not just checking the facts.
Yes.
Looking at the different nuances of the word,
Yeah.
I think helps you come at the idea from different angles, or just like, oh, I forgot to think about that. Sometimes it feels like, oh, thinking about something is just like holding the noun in your brain and waiting for connections to happen. Like you have to kind of go hunt for them.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where some of those pro-gym exercises come in also.
Yes.
That's true.
I think once you get used to the idea of using the headings, it starts applying to being able to think about anything. Because it's like, oh, thinking about something isn't just rehearsing what it is or holding the noun like it's a ball in my head and waiting for something to happen. It's like, okay, well, we can think about this angle, and then we can think about this angle. Or things like Aristotle's four causes. They're all just handholds, really, to be able to develop an idea and figure out, actually spend time thinking about something in a useful way.
I think that's why I like the etymological dictionary, where it gives like the whole history of the word.
Right.
Really makes it come to life for me, as long as I'm not tempted to ignore the current use. So tempting sometimes. The next one, I think, is still really tied to attention and concentration. She calls it intellectual volition. And she says the power of making ourselves think of a given subject at a given time. Most of us know how trying our refractory minds are in this matter, but if the child is accustomed to take pleasure in the effort as effort, the man will find it easy to make himself think of what he will. Of this whole list, for me, this is the biggest weakness. I have a really hard time switching. Like if I'm in the middle of something and I'm really concentrating on it, it drives my children crazy because it's like I can't hear them.
Oh, yeah. I get that.
And I have trouble making the switch. I mean, and there are times where it's really the children should just not be interrupting me. But there are other times when I should be able to be interrupted by the thing that is at hand. And I have trouble making myself do what I ought to do, which is listen to the people trying to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
I felt a little convicted by this section, I guess is what I'm saying. Accuracy. Taught not only through arithmetic, but through all of the small statements, messages, and affairs of daily life.
So I think she's saying that parents should be pedantic here. That's what I'm reading?
I don't know. It sounds no fun.
I mean, since I am the parent at this point, I think it sounds like great fun.
So you're saying I'm still a child.
Get to nitpick your kids and make them like, nope, try again.
I've realized how many times, because I can intuit what my children are saying.
Right.
That I'm not really requiring them to, and it's not even about like saying it properly. I mean, they're just not using any proper nouns at all. And I'm like, oh yeah, I totally get it.
Right.
You know, and Sai is listening to this going, what just happened?
Yeah.
How was that even a conversation? But I'm realizing now, here, let me give an even better example. My two youngest children, they practice having conversations without actually opening their mouths. I have always joked that they have their own twin language, even though they're not twins. And this is just another example of how they can go, and the other one, it completely knows what that person was saying. Then I listen to this on accuracy and I'm like, that is the worst thing possible, that they're practicing basically like some sort of weird form of ESP and have zero skills, whatever. Anyway, I've decided to be harder on them with when they say something to me, even though I can intuit it, trying to make them be more specific.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say that I do this more and more, the more often I'm editing papers. Like if I'm giving feedback on writing, that it comes faster to say, what's it? What do you mean it?
Right.
What is it? Wait a sec. What's the subject of this sentence? What are you talking about? Because you didn't actually say what you were talking about.
Yeah.
It's so easy to slip into and do when you do have, especially being homeschooled and being with the same people all the time, you know what people are talking about. You know what everyone's talking about.
Right.
you have all the context. But then you leave the house or you talk to someone else and they don't have the context, and you're going to have to actually use nouns and not pronouns.
Yes. Plutarch does that. I have a whole step in my prep for teaching Plutarch that involves me going through and replacing pronouns with nouns.
Oh, I bet that's helpful.
Because he says he far too often, and there might be 3 he's.
Right.
But from the context, I can figure out who's saying what. So I go back in and add the person's name more, not all the time, but more often, because it seems to help get a more accurate narration afterwards. If I just do that instead of cleaning up the mess after the reading, which is what happens. Reflection is the ruminating power, which is so strongly developed in children and is somehow lost with much besides of the precious cargo they bring with them into the world. There's nothing sadder than the way we allow intellectual impressions to pass over the surface of our minds without any effort to retain or assimilate. I think about how scrolling is the complete opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
You just on to the next thing, and they're not usually connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to just be able to spend time with an idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes at first maybe, I don't know if it feels like boredom, or you have to be bored first before you can spend some time ruminating on something. Well, I think we ruminate on things all the time.
Yeah.
But it's drama, it's negativity, it's our grievances. And what we need to be ruminating on is ideas and scripture and, God's crowded blessings on our life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I think of rumination, I think of animals, because obviously rumens have, multiple stomachs. But the reason for rumination, right, is that they're satisfied. And most of the time when they're ruminating, they're actually, or chewing the cud in those things, they're actually sitting down, resting, and bringing it back up again to digest more fully. It's a good thing for them, rather than what we do, which is just play imaginary conversations over in our heads. Like that's the kind of drama rumination that I don't think is good. But if we can really think about it as more of a digestive, and it's very good, and it's usually because there's satisfying things in our belly. We're not having to hunt for more. We actually get to take what we have and make it fully of use.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. It's even an altered brain state from what I've read when they've measured brain waves on the animals when they're ruminating. I read a paper one time on giraffes, of all things. It made me wonder if it's sort of like what we're getting at with Scholé.
Yes.
One time we talked about how Scholé might not be the reading part.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It might be more of the thinking afterward, like the moment of the apprehension of truth is really what we're getting at. And the reading is the path to that, because you need something outside of yourself to apprehend truth. Anyway, just made me think about our whole idea of leisurely learning or whatever. I think that's what reflection is.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, I know that a lot of people, they think, oh, I can't do audiobooks because once I start listening, then I just get so many thoughts. Well, I do that too. Like I'm often out on a walk or doing something else, and I will just sit and pause my audiobook and then just think about it too, because I do think that is part of it. Sometimes we do need those ideas to spark some of that rumination or those ideas, which she'll talk about the living ideas here in a minute, but in the section. Yeah. But I think that is a big part of it, is you have to have something to think on in order to ruminate.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to have the ideas and then time.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I really think the best books are like that, even if they're not audiobooks. Because I think about there's some books that I've been reading for 3 or 4 years. And the reason is because I read like 3 sentences and I get so excited by some thought that I have to go think about it before I can read the next thing. And it takes forever to read a book if you let yourself do that. But like the best books, I don't want to just devour them like that. In fact, sometimes that's how I know that I need to own a book and not be listening to it on audio, is because there's like too much pausing going on.
Yeah. How many times I'm like, oh, I'll just get the audiobook. I don't need the paper. No, I really should have just gotten the book, but it's good.
Well, she contrasts reflection and meditation, kind of the way she does with attention and concentration. So for her, the reflection or the rumination is you're just going over the content itself, unchanged. It's kind of like a narration, I would say, for the most part. But then with meditation, she says we're not content to go over the past. We allow our minds to follow out our subject to all its issues. So this is getting into more application, right? What are the ramifications? If this is true, what does that mean for, all of life and the whole world? For her, meditation is following all those little rabbit trails.
I like to think that that's what we do here sometimes.
Sometimes we do that.
Well, and sometimes that is the thing when you're reading a book. One way to follow the rabbit trails is to find someone to talk about it with.
Yes.
That's why friends don't let friends read alone.
That's
Amen.
right.
Amen.
And so if this is our kids, that means letting them verbally follow their rabbit trails, which sometimes is exhausting.
It is. For me, that was always the reason, not always. That wasn't the only reason, but it was definitely a major player in why I wanted us to always have limited school hours. Because I wanted them to have time to follow those things on their own. And so I'm not an unschooler. I have a prescriptive approach to their education, but I didn't want that to be their only experience in life. So they needed to have time where they were following those trails and thinking their own thoughts. And all of that came from, I'm not going to say done by lunch, because there's one child that was really resentful of how late lunch is. But with that said, being done, having a point in time where we are done, I think is super important for our family, at least, to be able to have time for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the habits. At the end, she just has a few ideas on how to do this. What was your favorite one as far as the how?
Her independent intellectual development of children, right? We do not sufficiently recognize the independent intellectual development of children, which it is our business to initiate and direct, but not to control or dominate. Oftentimes, a mother, we're in charge of so many things for so many years and making all of the decisions and, building in those habits. And there is a lot of habit training and just controlling things in order to have some semblance of order in the home. But we have to work on, by degrees, letting them make it their own. And initiation and direction are very, very different than controlling and domination. And it's easier to control and dominate than it is to initiate and direct.
Yeah, that's true. I like how she warns against parsimony or miserliness.
Yes.
So basically, this is why we can buy all the books, because you wouldn't want to be stingy.
You really might need them. I mean, that's what I got out of it.
Yeah, even if I don't need them, the kids might happen to pick it up. And
it's for the children's sake,
it's
honey.
for the children that I own all these books. But it's that idea of the generous feast and having it available so that there is something for the kids. When you initiate something and then they catch the vision or they get an idea, is there something for them to find for themselves? Or do they need you to get to something interesting? Because that might be a barrier.
Yeah.
When there's just bookshelves full of options, you never know what's going to be inspiring to them and what they take hold of themselves. It's really the same as the classical principle of multum non multa.
Yes. Well, that was going to be mine. So I'll go back a little bit and just mention that she talked about children's literature and basically not having silly books in your personal library.
Yeah.
But having really well-written books that are, appropriate for children. So she's not talking about things that children shouldn't be reading, shall we say. But she is talking about not being afraid to have high-level books for the children. So she says, out of any list of the 100 best books, I believe that 75 would be well within the range of children of 8 or 9. She's talking about the 100 best books for adults when she says that. They would delight in Rasselas. Aethan would fascinate them as much as Robinson Crusoe. The Fairy Queen, with its allegory and knightly adventures and sense of free moving and woodland scenery, would exactly fall within their humor. What they want is to be brought into touch with living thought of the best. And their intellectual life feeds upon it with little meddling on our part.
Yeah.
And I just loved that because she has so much confidence in the children. Yep. And people are so negative about kids lots of times and what they're capable of. And I just love that positive outlook. Like they could totally do it and they'll love it. And, just give it to them and see what happens,
My kids. Yeah. My kids, my mom got them some really twaddly books and they're like, yeah, I remember you wouldn't let us read those books, Mom. And I was like, she's like, whatever happened to those? They're like, well, she threw them away. And, my mom was of the opinion that my kids were not reading at, grade level at the point because of our, dyslexia issues. And I think after reading classical and Charlotte Mason, I was like, we do not have time for the worst books. We only have time for the best books. And, my kids all have memorized hundreds of lines of Shakespeare. They are reading amazing books now, albeit slowly and carefully, but they're not missing out. I mean, other than this conversation last week that was about, this traumatic event where I threw their stupid books in the garbage. They all kind of laughed at it, but I don't regret it.
Yeah.
Because it does matter what they read. And I always dislike that argument. Well, it doesn't matter within reason what they're reading, just as long as they're reading. And I just never agreed with that.
Yeah. I will just repeat my new saying that I'm convinced is going to become a bookmark and a sticker and a shirt someday for us. And that is, life is too short for bad books.
Yes.
I like it.
Yep. I just really feel there's a lot packed into that.
Yeah. Next t-shirt.
That's right. That is right. All right. So I will just close us up by reading Plato's Educational Aim, which I believe is her quoting John Ruskin.
Okay.
So he wrote, he meaning Plato, desired not to assist in storing the passive mind with the various sorts of knowledge most in request, as if the human soul were a mere repository or banqueting room, but to place it in such relations of circumstance as should gradually excite its vegetating and germinating powers to produce new fruits of thought, new conceptions and imaginations and ideas. What she's really getting at is that all of this makes growth possible. And when we look at that habits list and we fight for those habits, regardless of how hard it is, especially in the under 12 years, then what we're really trying to do is set up the situation for maximum growth.
Yeah.
Well, I think we reached the end of the chapter.
There we go.
Good job. Well, thank you for a lovely conversation. I love talking to you girls.
Thanks, Brandy. Talk to you
Thanks,
later.
Brandy.
Have a good afternoon. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend and then discuss it with her. This is a great way to continue the conversation. All of the books and things we mentioned today are linked in our show notes. Just go to scholésisters.com/SS132 to check it out. Don't forget that it's not too late to join us for the Grow Up Mentorship. Come and read and discuss 4 carefully chosen books with Mystie, Abby, me, and the rest of the club. Go to scholésisters.com/sistership and sign up for the Sophie Membership. Our next episode is our Christmas episode. We spend a lot of time talking about generosity, and we make sure to revisit the themes from our original Christmas episode by discussing the history of our Don't Be the White Witch movement. Make sure you're following us in your favorite podcast app because you don't want to miss this great conversation. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
Hi. Sorry. My friend had a doctor's appointment today, so I was taking care of her kids. They're still here, but I just told them their mom's almost here. So
does this mean they'll all come in the room?
No, I know, that's what I said. I was like, I'll probably get a whole gaggle of kids.
Sounds like fun.
No. Okay. Excuse me, because I just heard.
Oh,
Go ahead. We all need to hide, and their mom just got here. So just give me 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
I told Abby during a recording that she and I did, it used to be like it's an episode if someone buys a book. Yeah. But I feel like now it's an episode when Abby's kids act up. And if they don't, I'm like kind of disappointed that they didn't come say hi.
Oh, no outtake.
I know, seriously. I'm like, you ruined my whole plan.